I would like to welcome you all to this six prize papers lunch talk in our lecture series Winter Edition, and I especially welcome the many new guests and mailing list members in our audience. Apparently joining Mastodon was a good idea after all. I can only recommend it. Today it is my greatest pleasure to introduce our audience to our speaker, Dr. Myriam Bergeron-Maguire, a maître de conférence assistant professor at the University Sorbonne Nouvelle. It is the second time that I have the pleasure of introducing you to our audience this year. The first time was during our workshop on Mariners' Letters, 1600 to 1800, that me and Colin Greenstreet organized together in the summer. Which was where I learned about the great news that Myriam was successful in obtaining a research grant to study 1,000 French letters from the prize papers collection and investigate deeper into their linguistic specificities, which we will hear more about today. Very exciting. So it is truly a great pleasure to have you here doing this lecture series. Thanks for joining us here today, Myriam. Before you begin with your lecture, I'd first like to properly introduce you to our audience. Myriam Bergeron-Maguire finished her PhD in 2014 at the Université de Lorraine in Nancy, France, and her thesis, Le Français en Haute-Normandie, le témoignage des textes privés et documentaires, was published in 2018. After a 2-year postdoc in Zurich, she was appointed maître de conférence assistant professor at the Sorbonne Nouvelle in 2017. Her general areas of research are interlinear variation of French in Europe and America, linguistic contexts, historical sociolinguistics, and Gallo-Roman dialectology. Myriam is one of the experts I had the privilege of quoting during our last prize papers portal launch relating to the publication of French letters. And let me repeat here that I'm really grateful for our cooperation, which will continue during the next years to come. The paper she will be presenting today is a project presentation, and it is titled Missing Half the Picture, Classical, Not So Classical French, Project Presentation Methods and Challenges. And now, Myriam, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Lucas. Thank you for this really nice presentation. So I am now going to share my screen. So tell me whenever you see what I am sharing, if it's working or not.
It's working.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So, hello everyone. I'd like to start by thanking Lucas and the prize papers team for giving me the opportunity to present the MACINTOSH project today. So MACINTOSH stands for Missing Half the Picture, Classical, Not So Classical French, Project Presentation, Methods and Challenges, to give the entire title. And a special thanks goes to Randolph and Amanda for their help during my visits at the National Archives. So I will first start with a brief introduction, then talk about why we think the prize papers letters are of great value for our goals. Then I will give a few examples of some unique insights that we found in the letters. And after that, I will explain how we intend to study these linguistic features in a large sample. And last but not least, I will present the team. And I'm very happy that there are some members of the team that are with us today. So first of all, the project is focused on classical French. So classical French is an established label, most of the times referring to a period comprised between 1650 and 1700s, sometimes 1750. Many authors, though, extend this to 1799. So just to be clear, the period that we will be referring to here is 1650 until 1799. So we're taking the broader definition of it. Now, the history of French has been dominated by a very standard perspective for a very long time, as many other Western European languages, which means that we admit that diversity and variation existed throughout the Middle Ages. And then afterwards, the subsequent centuries are mainly seen as different stages gradually leaning towards a standard language. But this is a traditional view of standardization, and it is mostly a history of either printed texts or either, in fewer cases, handwritten text produced by a small upper layer of society, mainly well-educated men. So over time, the written language of this small minority became increasingly uniform, which has led to thinking of this process as a large-scale uniformization. And for the French language, this linguistic uniformity was assumed to have been reached during the classical period, which is still nowadays seen as a golden age for French language and also for French literature, as a matter of fact, in a very political and ideological manner, by the way. So this project's main goal is to replace this traditional perspective that has also been called the tunnel vision by some English linguists by a broader approach, building on the prize papers collection and more specifically on a number of French letters that are part of that collection. So why the prize papers letters? So as we know, the letters come from a rich variety of senders, both men and women of all social ranks, and some of them, especially the less skilled ones, wrote in a variety of French that was quite different from the one that we usually encounter in printed texts at the time. So this gives us insights that remained mostly out of reach up until now. But we are not only interested in letters written by semi-literate individuals, because we know that of all documents, private letters are considered to be as close to informal language of the past as the written medium will allow it to be. So we are therefore also interested in letters that are intended to relatives, for example, or to close friends. Because so generally speaking, we expect that as in any close communication, the prize papers letters will contain a high degree of variation, whether it be a social variation or a regional variation. And that will concern lexicon and also grammar. So we will be building on a sample of 1,000 French letters comprised in the prize papers collection. And this project aims to document unique insights about features that vanished from the highly formal written language at an early period, or either remained excluded from it, allowing us to reveal unknown aspects of the French language during the 17th and the 18th centuries. Also, the classical period is not a random selection. It specifically corresponds to the French language's first period of great expansion in America and in the Mascarenes. So by showing how the letters can fill in the gaps left by traditional historical linguistics, our intention is to describe what is the common ancestor that led to the existing French and Creole French varieties in America and in the Indian Ocean. And this common ancestor is a 17th century variety of vernacular spoken French. So I will now give a few examples of the features that we observed in the letters up until now to make it more concrete. So these are all hardly attested features that were never part of the formal written language at any time during the history of the French language. Some of them are regional and others are part of a more widespread low register. So we witnessed some verbal tense inflections that, for example, the first one here is a verbal tense inflection that is regional, se porte en bien, se porte bien. We also found what we call a syncretism, meaning one same form undertaking both grammatical genders or both singular and plural. For example, the definite article un used to determine masculine and feminine nouns in many letters, whereas une is the common feminine form. And another example is the pronoun for the third person masculine, which is identical for the singular and the plural in a few letters. And normally in the printed text, we would find ILS with a final S, even though it's not pronounced anymore, but still that's what we would usually encounter. And I also listed other features here, impersonal pronoun omission, for example, or some original segmentation influenced by liaison. What we call liaison in French is this sandy sound that you hear when we say trois autres quarts de café, this liaison, which is very specific to French. And so here it means 3/4 of coffee. And this consonant is written, well, normally it's not, etc., etc. So here I gave mainly some grammar features, but there is also a lot of regional vocabulary to be found in the letters. But I gave a few examples of those last July, so I've concentrated now on grammar to just give other examples. So now, how do we study this in a sample of 1,000 letters? So some phenomena need to be I forgot to say something very important here. I'm just going to go back for a few seconds. What is interesting, what is most interesting about these features is that all of these are part of at least one variety of French or Creole French spoken in America and in the Mascarenes today. So, which makes them even more interesting. Yes, so I was saying, how do we study this in a sample of 1,000 letters? So some phenomena need to be attested in more than one letter for social linguistic reasons, for example, because they can be related to one or many social factors, such as age, gender, geographical or social origin. And we also need to assess the distribution and the frequency of some features in order to know if they are specifically individual or collectively extended or from a specific community, for example. So how do we organize the material in order to transform this entire new set of data into a searchable corpus? So the answer is digital philology. So transcriptions of the letters will be made following a digital transcription protocol using what the eScriptorium software. And this interface will allow us to manually transcribe by maintaining the link between text and image. And it's also very convenient since it automatically produces a TEI encoding version of the transcription to which the metadata can be simply added afterwards in what we call the TEI header. So this interface will allow us to display first a diplomatic transcription without any normalization of word boundaries, for example, where original line breaks will be preserved and no punctuation or diacritics will be added. So the diplomatic transcription method is intended, of course, in order to remain as faithful as possible to the text. And this interface will also allow us to display a critical edition where we will provide a critical apparatus comprising a summary of the content, interpretation of the correspondence's context, resolved ambiguity, and observations about writing practices, etc., etc., etc. Then we will move on to what we call the linguistic annotation phase, where we will tokenize, lemmatize, and annotate the corpus. So the first phase is basically to create segmentations that will prepare the corpus for the next step, which is to lemmatize. So the tokenization is basically segmentation, and it will be done manually using a software that is called Oxygen Editor. And then we will be able to lemmatize the corpus, meaning that we will link every entry previously carved out with existing dictionary nomenclatures. And those for French are, and for our specific period, are le Dictionnaire du Moyen Français, which is for Middle French, the FEV, which is, so Französisches Etymologisches Wörterbuch, which is for French, but especially Gallo-Romance dialects, and also the Trésor de la langue française for classic and modern French. We will, after lemmatizing the corpus, we will then annotate it, meaning that a tag set will be used to define a specific part of speech for each entry. So this means that it will allow us to proceed to various kinds of linguistic research, including lexical and part of speech data queries. And then finally, to make it a searchable corpus, we will use the corpus search engine BlackLab, which is currently used by the Dutch project based on the prize papers material. And this engine allows many kinds of queries at all linguistic levels. So it will be possible to search for an exact form, a lemma, a part of speech, or even a combination of these variables. And the displayed results will also show the metadata of the corresponding letter. And we would very much like to include here a link leading to the corresponding digital image stored on the prize papers portal website whenever it is available. And now I will be moving on to the team. So the project involving classical French, digital philology, and French and Creole varieties, we needed to gather an eclectic team that we divided into 5 working subgroups, including a digital humanity group of specialists who will contribute to the development of our digital database with a research engineer. And they will also be responsible for developing annotation models. And these specialists are Gilles Souvet, Francesca Frontini, and Simon Gabet. A group of specialists of morphosyntax will share the responsibility of identifying informal features related to grammar. And those are Pierre Larrivé and Béatrice Dalbeau. A group of philologists responsible for developing a transcription protocol and identifying during the transcription phase epistolary conventions, stylistic variations, etc. And those specialists are Rembert Oyfe, Laura Linsmeier, and Giersbert Rutten. That was part from the Dutch Papers project, Giersbert Rutten. And then Jean-Paul Chauveau, Jan Grube, and Anja Stoykart are experienced specialists of French and Gallo-Romance dialects, especially regarding lexicon, and they will share the responsibility of identifying regional lexicon, as well as what we call contact-induced features, so borrowings, for example, from Gallo-Romance dialects, or eventually from indigenous languages in America. And finally, André Thibault and Wim Remissen are specialized in French varieties from Quebec, Acadia, Louisiana, and from the French Caribbean islands. And Claire de Maréchal is also part of this group. She is a PhD student advised by André Thibault, and her thesis is about French in the Caribbean letters of the prize papers collection. So the project starts officially on January 1st, and we hope to achieve this research program within 3.5 years because we are very ambitious. And in the meantime, feel free to visit our website for our upcoming events and publications. The website is also indicated in my bio on Twitter. And so that's it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to any questions or comments that you may have.